The people of Great Britain are expected to elect a new parliament in 2024, and polls predict defeat for Prime Minister Sunak's Conservatives. But there are still other problems as well. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak started the current year with 5 promises. He was only able to achieve one of them, that's halving the inflation rate. The fact that the Conservative head of government's track record is so poor at the beginning of the 2024 election year has not only to do with Brexit, but also 7.5 years after the ill-fated referendum, leaving the EU still determines the politics, economy and national mood in the kingdom. To illustrate this, one need only go through the 4 promises that Sunak failed to achieve. His most difficult project was to get the British economy back on a growth path. Although gross domestic product, the GDP, has now returned to pre-pandemic levels, the economy has stagnated since then and even shrank in the third quarter of 2023. The outlook for the coming year is also bleak. The OECD expects a meager increase of 0.7%, and Sunak can no longer console his compatriots who are suffering from a loss of prosperity by pointing out that they are still doing better than Germany. Next year they won't, and look at our government. Shortly before the end of the year, the British government announced a victory for Brexit, though. As before joining the EU, sparkling wine and wine can again be sold in bottles the size of a pint, that means 0.568 liters. The end of EU regulations makes it possible, and for some tradition-conscious Brits this is a success. But it's doubtful whether this change will also give new impetus to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative leadership. In the election year of 2024, a vote is expected in May or in autumn, the Tories are threatened with a debacle. Sunak and the Conservatives need a miracle. That was said by political scientist Mark Garnett from Lancaster University. And government polls have long been predicting a landslide defeat. The opposition Labour Party is in the lead by between 15 and 25%. And what also gives the Tories little reason to hope is the gap to the Social Democrats is not shrinking in the long term. In 2023, the Tories never made it above 29%, and if they achieved this value in the election, it would be their historically worst result ever. And 2 names in particular are associated with the decline. Boris Johnson, who alienated voters with lies, the quagmire of the Partygate affair, and the appearance of nepotism. And his successor, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister with the shortest term in office in history, who plunged the economy into chaos with adventurous announcements, and many Brits are still suffering from this today. After almost 14 years of Conservative governments with a total of 5 Prime Ministers, many Brits have had enough. Incumbent Sunak, who presents himself as a candidate for a new beginning, even though he was already in government, cannot stop the downward spiral. Even in the EU, very few people are relying on Sunak. The German federal government is reportedly not expecting the Prime Minister to make an inaugural visit. Rather, they are in the process of forging stronger ties with Labour, which for a Social Democrat government is not okay. But Sunak has not yet found an issue with which he could bring a broad mass of people back to his side. And as I said, he made 5 promises a year ago by which he wanted to be measured. At most, one thing is true. As I said, inflation has more than halved. But economists emphasize that it is less Sunak who's responsible for this and more the improved global economic situation. And things are looking bad for the remaining pledges. The economy is stagnating, national debt is not falling, and waiting times for the NHS have even continued to rise. Irregular migration has fallen slightly, but the backlog of asylum applications is far from being cleared, and net migration has even risen. Sunak is not a speaker like Johnson. He doesn't get people carried away during his appearances. Rather, the son of a doctor and a pharmacist appears like the investment banker he once was. His great wealth and his penchant for traveling even short distances by helicopter reinforce the image of the aloof politician. Sunak promised integrity, professionalism and accountability at all levels when he took office a good 14 months ago. After the scandals under Johnson, the country hoped for stability, but the Tories themselves are still causing the biggest stir. Internal party problems distract from government plans, and Home Secretary or Interior Minister James Cleverly recently had to apologize for a joke about knockout drops. Only recently had the government announced new measures against so-called spiking, that is the misuse of knockout drops. The Tories don't always pull together politically either. Before Christmas, Sunak was able to avert a revolt from the right against his asylum policy. But the issue is likely to continue to heat up in the new year. The right-wing Conservatives have allegedly received promises, which the moderates in turn reject. So a compromise is not in sight. Sunak's biggest challenge at the start of the year is to avoid divisions in his party. Many MPs no longer cared about public loyalty. They think the next election is already lost, and dozens of MPs have already announced that they will not run again. And we can hear that the remaining Tories are already fighting hard for the last constituencies that are considered safe. And political scientist Garnett does not rule out that there could actually be a change in leadership again. Many Tory MPs see a new leader as potentially the party's last chance, he says. In background discussions, there is lively speculation about possible successors to Sunak, but especially about the role of an opposition leader after the election, which says a lot. The names of Economics Minister Kemi Badenoch, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, and former Migration State Secretary Robert Jenrick, all of whom belong to the right wing of the party, have long been mentioned. And experts expect the Tories to move even further to the right after an election defeat. They are already struggling with the poll success of the right-wing Reform UK party, once founded as the Brexit Party, which became the strongest force in Great Britain in the 2019 European elections. After being marginalized for a long time by the Tories, the right-wing populists are now polling at up to 10%. And even if they have little chance of winning seats in the British majority voting system, the first past the post, they are likely to cost the Tories votes. And the Prime Minister could even be replaced by a right-wing populist. Brexit champion and Reform co-founder Nigel Farage has been flirting with rejoining the Conservative Party for weeks, and when asked, has not ruled out taking over the leadership. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here on the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.